welcome to the Naked Dialogue podcast.
Word? How goes it?
Are you good? Everything's alright?
Yep, everything's pretty good. I try to do an introduction. You want an introduction first?
And what is real art, and like just go off.
Okay. Is real art. That is my Instagram name. We just chose that. Can't even look at a recording camera and say why that name was chosen. All I can say is that it was particularly funny in a circumstantial situation, and we were talking about is it real or is it not? So is it real? Is real art, it's real. So that goes for any art, and it was pertaining to psychedelic art specifically. So it was a really long, hilarious circumstance and semi-psychedelic ordeal, let's put it that way, for such a psychedelic art. And that's what primarily all the Instagram's about. It's all just about just the adventures of how the art's created, kind of. That's just my opinion, at least. I'm a pretty regular dude. I don't do too much.
But why questioning the real? Like, I don't get that. Why question the real?
Well, it's that's the whole thing about psychedelics. You're intentionally going into a cognitive space where you're going to question reality and alter your perception on what is real and how you perceive reality itself. With certain states of consciousness, desire to perceive certain things. I've felt and perceived certain things from certain states of consciousness. It's a strange opening statement, but it's going to be a radical statement. But I believe everybody, when they take psilocybin mushrooms, should make a finger paint. And it sounds kind of as absurd and a little bit childish at first, but I firmly believe every person deep down has this understanding of what's called the language of art. And it's the 5-character language, right? There's a horizontal, a vertical, a diagonal, a dot, and an arc. And this is the language of art. It's the language that constitutes every shape in this entire space, right? And not only every shape here, but in every language that we write with. It's the abstraction that we as human beings use to create things within our space, how to transmute things into art. Anything we craft is a piece of art. So it's when someone takes psilocybin mushrooms, I feel like it brings us to this particular creative space, and it's particularly tribal. It's deep. It's rooted in ancestral heritage to use this language to create something, and something that represents the internal universe, how we feel inside. That's kind of like the whole idea of art, right? You're projecting how it is you interpret the world around you and what you perceive to be real. So it's with different strains of psilocybin or psilocybe mushrooms, right? Because there's different strains within the genus, right? The genus is psilocybe, and there's 203 of them. So it's just like psilocybe mushrooms has a bunch of different strains. Cannabis has a bunch of different strains, and each different strain of cannabis will have its own cognitive effect. Terpenes hit everybody differently. Every plant has its own unique ratio of alkaloids, although it has these primary constituents. Same thing with psilocybin. So it's for example, wavy cap cyanescens. It's a strain of psilocybe mushrooms. It grows in the Northwest. It grows also in the UK, and it grows kind of around the world in kind of temperate areas and kind of colder places. And it grows from alder trees. It's oftentimes found in wood chips and mulch and landscape. It's a mushroom that has its own unique strain and effect. And I had an experience with them, and I had found that what I wanted to finger paint was a heart. And it sounds so ridiculous, but I wanted to make a finger painting of a heart. And the reason why is because I felt as if I truly loved being in this existence and being itself, as if I could feel being alive and being connected to others, to just being. And I wanted to project how that felt on the inside. And it just felt warm and loving and caring. And that was just a particular species or strain of mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's just one experience. I've had several different strains of psilocybin, and I find they all have their own kind of effect, or everybody kind of says, like, psilocybin has its own message, right? It's got that one kind of message or whatever. I kind of disagree. I feel like it's like got this effect, and
Okay.
each species has its own kind of message, and it's got kind of like this own thing it wants you to do. Some of them want you to finger paint, some of them want you to just meditate. Sounds kind of strange.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, like philosophy as a essence. I made a finger painting of a dancing man. That sounds really weird. I made a dancing man, and it's a really psychedelic finger painting. And it looks, kind of like a blur, but to me, I know what it is. It's the dancing Azzy man. I feel like when people take psilocybin, they should do tribal things. They should try to get in touch with their roots, where their heritage lies. And I feel like the language of art is the deepest of heritage. You don't need to know, where your true blood heritage comes from, right? If you know the language of art, you could find your own heritage. You could find your own within you. You could find what kind of person you are, or what you feel as if your kind of ancestors have genetically left you. What's kind of deep rooted within you as a being, as a conscious unique entity in this space. And you get to use the language to project an image, to share with other people, to teach them what it is, this message you have to say. you know so it's like, is that real or is that not? I don't know, but it seems pretty real to me. So it's real art. That's why.
I like the way you say language of art because I feel like in Jungian psychoanalysis, I could translate language of art as unconscious, collective unconscious, because collective unconscious is basically all the cultural, historical to a certain degree, and also psychological at a very broad level, archetypes embedded in each one of us. Yes, you might have a different archetype, or like you might be able to recognize maybe Christian Roman symbols more or archetypes more. I would be able to recognize more of the Eastern ones, but we all have
um
a very primitive level, these archetypes. And those could
you
those
can definitely recognize them, right? It's like, you like, when you say recognize, do you mean like identify with like the name of what it is? You know what I mean? There's a psychedelic compound that's called dimethyltryptamine, and it's known to reveal religious symbols and archetypes.
Mhm.
And I myself, I haven't seen very much Western symbolism. I've seen a lot of Eastern symbolism, but that's the thing. I can't particularly recognize it. And it sounds so strange, right? To be able to try to proclaim, right? You've seen symbols of a different land, right? Without having ever been to that land. I was relatively certain a particular symbol, right, is from like, say, the east, right? All I know is that came farther from the east. I've had a sort of a brief DMT experience where I saw, like, I'd call them Buddhas, right? But it's just like a figure of a person meditating, right? And it's like a pattern of them, and it's like yellow and green, but it's like metallic, as if it's like gold and like some other metal. And it's like a beautiful jade green and this beautiful pristine yellow gold. And they're like up upright and upside down, making like a triangular pattern. And it's like with depth, 3 dimension. And it's like, why would I see that being a Westerner? It's like I don't particularly believe I've had enough Eastern influence to like see something like that. I I kind of feel like certain substances show us what kind of is within the collective consciousness, as if it's something we can kind of tap into. That just kind of like makes me question it, like, why is there a clash between Western and Eastern philosophy when all philosophy is really just the philosophy of man and what comes out of the human mind as us as a species, as a being, as an entity, not as like people from lands or any sort of separation or division, like that's just how I see it.
It's quite interesting because like you know how there's this, I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory or if it's for real, but Jesus Christ had also visited India in the very north region called Kashmir. And I feel like there might be like two, feet prints. And so I feel like they've converted that into a church somewhere in Kashmir. It's interesting. Like, you could find all sorts of archetypes embedded in all sorts of cultures all around
Yeah.
now, because maybe we're so digitalized and globalized, but still, there's this question of having a psychedelic experience and seeing Egyptian, pharaoh hieroglyphic imagery in your hallucination.
Yes.
In
How
this,
could you see that if you're not from Egypt, or if you've never been in a, like, you've never like uh you've just never been exposed to that actual three-dimensional object in space. Like, you've never truly been exposed to that consciously, you know? I feel like just having had seen some form of symbolism, like some point in time, like saying I scroll on your phone and seen a couple of Egyptian symbols, I don't think that's going to trigger like a series of like 10 to 30 plus like intricately designed geometrical symbols that like appear to be some sort of symbol. And it's like, you go throughout, like you go to try to project or what happened in your like psychedelic experience, right? And you're like describing this entity or this space or this object to someone you know. It's like I had a DMT experience that I seen some particular Egyptian phenomena, I should say. And like I told my friend about it. I said, I don't know what this being was, but it was like 2D, and it was on these big ass intricate doors that seemed like they were really grand and like 40 feet tall. And like I was in line with a bunch of people, and we were all kind of floating off the ground, and I got to my point in line, but I never got through the doors. I just got up to these doors, and I saw like these beautiful silver and gold pools on the side. When I look on the doors, there was this entity with like a jackal face, and this small like rod in his hand, and there was two of them facing each other. And as I described this to my friend, and I'm like telling him of the doors and the colors on the doors, and like how they both had these like an arc, and inside the strip of the arc were all these symbols like intricately painted like silver and gold. And like he's telling me like, oh, like a jackal, like you mean like Anubis? And I'm like, what? What's Anubis? And he Googles it, and he shows me a picture, and I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ, like I cannot believe you're showing me like a picture of something I had seen in my own personal psychological trip. So like, how could you be doing that? Like that's a real thing. You experience DMT, it's so much information, and it's like such a profuse amount of data. You can't particularly absorb every single symbol and every single thing, so you can only get these particular details that stand out oh so well to you as a unique consciousness in your experience, and only what you can really absorb. So it's like I couldn't draw all these symbols, but like there's just a handful of them that I could really remember, and it's like they were like things that were out there on the internet. You could like look them up. So does that mean that like in my psychological experience that I had perceived just subconsciously all this subliminal information so many times, so much that I saw that? I don't know. I don't particularly feel as if I have. Seeing how I live in Montana and all the people I know are either like living in a city or they live on a ranch and they have cowboy boots and a cowboy hat. You know what I mean? Like I don't see where I could have been exposed to eat like Egyptian like symbolism. Like that's just my perception of it.
Yeah, no.
I don't know.
Remember we had that thinking moment. Remember when I told you that was Hand of Mysteries when you were describing?
Oh yeah, yes, that was like the most. That blew me away, dude. You were like tripping me out there. I was like, I can't believe there was like an actual thing. It's like me as a regular person, I'm like comfortable saying it on a recording because like I've been to a professional and everything. Um, I have high functioning autism. I'm just a regular person. I'm just like I can like drive and talk and have conversations, and I can like functionally go on a podcast. It sounds ridiculous, but it's like not everybody who's high functioning can do those things. There's high functioning people who can't even talk, but they're still high functioning. It's called sometimes Asperger's and all that, but what I was describing is that my whole life I've had this really serious problem and obsession, these 5 questions, ever since I was very young. And it is who, what, why, how, and when. And I felt as if someone could answer me these 5 questions. If you could put a problem in my palm, then I could answer any problem. I could solve any problem because I had answered all 5 of these questions. And I had to figure out a way to answer those 5 questions. And as I described that to you, you were telling me about this really awesome palm. Would you please articulate that to like the audience?
It's called the Hand of Mysteries, or I think it's also called the Philosopher's Hand, and has like 5 different symbols or archetype. Yeah, that was crazy.
No, awesome. That's like some morphic resonance stuff, you know? It's like a coincidence, but what's really a coincidence, you know? Like, how do we know what coincidences are? It's really funny that like that's like the philosopher's hand, and it's like to me as just a being, a conscious being, a conscious human, I felt as if this was just the thing. This is the dilemma. Everybody should have this in mind, and nobody else did, and I was the only one like trying to tell people like, dude, if we can like figure this out, then we could solve anything, and it'll be all right. So it's like, well, then we could like have any problem come our way, and we'll continue to like answer those problems and like solve, like find actual viable solutions, you know. And that kind of comes into philosophy, doesn't it? Isn't it like philosophy is like just the biggest of problems or the biggest of questions that are always unanswered because we don't know how to answer them or we don't have a way to prove them, you know? So it's like it's just really profound how like that's the philosopher's hand, you know, and it's like that's just a thing. It's just an archetype in my mind. So I feel like it's an archetype in everyone's mind, you know. It really should be. At least I would think so. And in my opinion, it's like everybody kind of is art, you know, because it's like, what is art, you know? Like, what is art? And it's like that language, right? And it's like we're made of it. So it's like every pore of our skin is a dot, it's a circle, and it's like every curve of our face or our hands or our limbs is an arc. You know, it's all an arc. So it's like we're all dots and arcs, you know, and it's like you can go throughout nature and find all those 5 shapes, and it's like that's what we make art out of, those 5 shapes. So it's like if those 5 shapes are what art is, then it's like, are we as a being, as a being in creation within existence, right? Not already a piece of or a work of living art, you know? And is not just being within existence the act of living artistic? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
is that not poetic and like within expression or expressionist, I should say? I feel like it is just living itself. I feel like just being a being and going through existence itself. There's a type of art to it. Like there is an art to living. Sociality and normalcy. It's a like I've never like I come from like a small town, right? And it's like being somebody who is like high functioning. It's like being in social interactions is particularly overstimulating. So like seeing people go through their life, you know, and like achieve their goals. It's like muster up enough ego and determination to say like they're gonna do a particular thing, and not only do they do that, but they go above and beyond that, and they like make an image or a self or like make them or build up their character, I should say, build up their image of self and who they are off of their actions and what they've accomplished. To me that's like astounding to witness, because it's so overstimulating to just for me to just kind of like be to like when we just wake up, it's like wow, like just my perception of awareness and my personal opinion feels somewhat overstimulating, but it's always mitigatable. As with everybody, that's how we're all conscious in here through the day, you know what I mean? Because like we're all living. So I feel like there's kind of an art to it because it's we're made of it, you know, we're made of that language. I'm a, it just depends on how it's oriented, right? I feel like we only feel like it's art if a person, a conscious person, expressed it, right? But it's like every being is like a product of other beings, right? So it's like, are we all not a product of the expression of love, or like, you know, the ever so existing archetype that is art, right? Like we're all a product of an expression, and art is human expression, you know, like art is human expression through the language of art. So like when people become a tattoo artist, it's like they really put a lot of training and effort into it. For the longest time I wanted to be a tattoo artist, which is really funny, and there's actually a tattoo parlor here in my town, and they're called the steel paintbrush. Then I went in there, and there's a lady who runs the shop. She's a really, really awesome artist. I can't remember her name specifically right now because there's like several of them who like run the shop. But they had this really awesome, like it was just so profound to me because when I went in there, it was already overstimulating enough, right? Like 'cause it's like a parlor, and there's like a bunch of people, and they're all tatted up, and they all got art, so they are a canvas, and you want to look at all their art, but it's also like weird because it's like then you're kind of like checking out this person, but you're also like you're not trying to be like that. You're just like, I don't mean to check you out in that way. You did this. You got all the art put on you. You make me want to look at you because you are a canvas. Come on, bro. Like you look awesome, you
Mhm.
know? So it's
Yeah.
like, and then it's like all the walls are covered with tattoos or potential images, It's like, it's so cool. But they had this $3,000 drafting table. And I remember this drafting table so much. It was the most awesome and magnificent artist tool I'd ever seen because it had this light in there. It had this really awesome adjustable, really big table, and it had all these little clips for all your pens, and it's like it had this light, and you could turn it on, and it's like so when you could do tracing and stuff to like make sure you put like tracing for your transfers, right? So it's like you take an image that you drew on paper and you put your transfer paper on it when you're a tattoo artist. So that way, when you take the transfer paper, you put it on the person, and it'll adhere to their skin. So you have an outline, something to start off with when you go for the scarification or for the tattoo. For like someone to be a artist of any kind, it takes several years of dedication, and I feel like that goes for any school of art. It doesn't matter what you do. You could be making clay or tattooing people or like knitting sweaters.
Maybe archetypally, I might have one thing up here somewhere, that I might most resonate to, but at the same time, I feel like it's a journey to find it, and I'm still on it.
I I've been thinking about getting a tattoo, but I just have no idea what I would get. And it's like it really is a journey to find what you would get, right? Because it's got to be a symbol that speaks to you.
And you were talking about respiratory stimulant effects.
Okay, so like the lysergamines or LSD has a respiratory stimulant factor because it was invented to treat respiratory depression, cluster and migraine headaches, and ADHD. So it's like it does all these three things particularly well. And when people have respiratory depression or like asthma, right, or like say even if they were suffering from like bronchitis or something at the time, if they take a respiratory stimulant like LSD, even like 25 micrograms, 50 micrograms, even a low dose like that, it'll actually have a medicinal, effect for 12 hours. It will breathe really well. And it's always really nice when people have respiratory depression, like what's so interesting is that how it's like how it affects our organization, right? I think acid's really interesting how it affects organization because it's pertaining towards pattern perception. It's not pertaining towards movement perception. And movement is a pattern, right? But it's like movement is a abstract pattern. Movement is a very abstract thing. And psilocybin increases our perception towards abstraction, such as movement. Psilocybin increases our perception towards abstraction like movement. And lysergamines increases our perception towards organized patterns or patterns such as organization. And it changes it towards like an even rate. They so it's like not only does it treat as like respiratory depression, and it works when people actually have asthma, or any sort of respiratory depression because it's a respiratory stimulant. But the U.S. government did a study where they took autistic children, right, and they gave them lysergamines, they gave them LSD in particular dose ranges, and they found that 70% of them, or 7 out of 10 of the 50, it was a very small sample, but like 7 out of 10 of them were able to come out of their autism enough to be in their classification of high functioning, no joke, which sounds really strange. But 7 out of 10 of them were able to maintain a support network around them that allowed them to stay high functioning to the degree of which they could talk and communicate and function a lot better. So it's like, and like people who have autism and even just high functioning autism have organically been drawn to lysergamines for like a long time. Like Tim Sully, right? He was one of the dudes who made acid with the Grateful Dead, and we're trying to as Wallesley Stanley. He was the guy who made acid for the Grateful Dead. But Tim Sully got apprenticed under Oswald Z. Stanley. And Tim Sully has high functioning autism, and he was organically just drawn to the substance because of how it made him feel. And the aspect that he felt as if he was more one and connected with everything. And that's typically something people report from psilocybin. Well, it's like with lysergamines, like oftentimes regular people, at least most of the time from my observations, people whom do not have autism and are not on the spectrum at all, they oftentimes can become stilled, overstimulated, and as if they cannot communicate the same, or as if linguistic function is lowered, as if like when they speak, it's like they can only articulate these really prolific points, uh, or it's like super overstimulating or overbearing to articulate their thoughts, and like how they're perceiving their own thoughts is a lot, and how they're perceiving their senses is a lot. And what's so funny is that like people with high functioning autism and regular autism, anybody on the spectrum like whom can communicate and articulate their sensitization of awareness, is that their regular day-to-day life is already overstimulating like that, as if their own internal perception of awareness is so complex, as if it's hard to articulate and communicate thoughts. And it's like when people who are on the spectrum take acid, they don't get more overstimulated like that. They they actually like get more organized, and it makes it easier for them to communicate. And I myself am on the spectrum, and I have experienced this, and I experienced it a lot. That's actually why I think acid's truly a good medication, is something that should be legalized. Because like it could truly benefit like a lot of society. There's a lot of people on the spectrum who could actually use to get to a point of linguistic communication that they could talk to people and feel comfortable going outside their home on their own, be able to walk to somewhere like the grocery store and do things. Like, and like Montana's got kind of a rough population, so to speak. There's a good bit of people in Montana who have a sort of psychological or pardon me, what's classified as a mental illness, whether that's being on the spectrum or having some sort of actual like say bipolar disorder or something like that. There's like a large percentage of the population. I think it's like 40% of the population of Montana has like some sort of mental illness. So it's like a lot of that, like I don't know what the exact percentage is, but for like autistic people, but I know a handful of like high functioning people, but most people I know who are high functioning, I'd say like about 6 out of 10 of them that I've met are that have high functioning autism. They don't talk the same as like I do. There's like very few people who like talk the same, and I myself, it took me a long time to be like able to consciously decide to like articulate my own thoughts and sensitization in a manner of which I could have linguistic communication like a regular conversation. It was like almost incomprehensible or inconceivable to me to like sit down and talk to someone, anyone. It was nuts. Like so like me having my first ever LSD experience, I think at the age of 17, like the first time I was able to like calm down, sit still, and feel organized in my mind, and feel as if I wanted to talk to people, and that when I talked to people, it was calm and fluid, and that I made sense, and that I didn't feel as overbearing. I felt as if my senses weren't overstimulated, but just organized. And I was always really astounded because it's like, as you know, you just from talking to my buddy Brody, just people like that, right? It's like a lot of people whom are not on the spectrum, when they take LSD, they experience an overstimulating experience, right? But when people are on the spectrum, they can be overstimulated from the experience. It's just not the same. It's like almost as if it refines their function towards normalcy, and it's beneficial, like cognitively and socially and communicatively. Come on. I think psilocybin though is really prolific because like it's amazing to see that there's a substance that reduces fear, right? Like something that lowers our fear response. I think that's amazing. And also it's like when you look at the comparison of like acid and psilocybin, it's like a fungal coin. It's like acid, it causes muscle tension, right? And it also it kind of increases like the distribution of self or ego or the default mode. And when they looked at MRI scans of LSD, it found that it's an even distribution of blood flow throughout all hemispheres. And when it comes to psilocybin, it's a reorientation of blood flow within the hemispheres, right? So it's like it's reoriented towards the amygdala, and they're like in the visual and the language cortex. So it's very different. And psilocybin relaxes muscles. It's like psilocybin reduces ego. Well, lysergamines increase ego, and lysergamines like increase muscle tension. And I believe it's from India actually. There's like kind of it's a kind of like a guru or India Indian representation of ego as being by definition a tightness within the muscles. Ego is a type of muscle tightness. So that's like, and that's kind of like a yogic thing, I believe, because like the whole idea, like with a yogi, it's like by stretching, right? It's like you're trying to like relinquish ego within your muscles. You're trying to let go of muscle tension, ease it out. Like the whole idea of meditations that you're finding stillness through self-discipline, right? Through your breath. And you're trying to kind of let that go, trying to achieve these altered states of consciousness, but through the state of consciousness that you're in, just within your state of existence, you know? So it's like, I believe it's like a yogic thing, definition of ego. It's like by being muscle tightness. And I heard that from, I heard that from like Terrence McKenna, and I believe also Ram Dass. So I'm not sure, those are Western guys. So I don't know, you know. I do know that when it comes to psilocybin and lysergamines, they are truly two different sides of a coin. And some people need other things. I feel like if we were to do MRI scans on people, right? Like say, for instance, people who are on the spectrum, and I think they should compare those MRI scans to people who are under the influence of high dose and moderate doses of psilocybin and lysergamines. So we could see if people, because in my opinion, it seems as if people whom are on the spectrum are oftentimes overstimulated in this strange, overbearing way, it seems to me as if conceptually someone, although it's like psilocybin kind of reduces fear and anxiety, someone could have like a psychological wiring that's more similar to like the psilocybin, right? Just organically, that's just kind of the flow. So when you take lysergamines and you have this even plasticity, all of a sudden it's like you can get in touch with this default mode, and you can kind of establish these default skills which you kind of needed to be there but had no actual access to before, to like make set defined hard programmings and psychological wirings that's like a reliable circuit you could always go back to. It seems as if a lot of people I've met whom are on the spectrum don't really have those the same. It's as if it's this constant kind of dissolution of this reliable default circuits like psilocybin, like that. And the psilocybin experiences, as people know, can be particularly overstimulating in like the most overbearing of a way. And it's like it dissolves our boundaries, specifically the default mode. So I think it'd be a good experiment for people to do, to compare people on the spectrum and different parts of the spectrum and their MRI scans with people who are under regular people who are not on the spectrum, who are under the influence of psilocybin, and then compare the people who are not on the spectrum, right, with their regular brain scan to someone with whom it is on the spectrum and their brain scan on lysergamines, and see where the balance is out, right? Because I feel like it's astounding to see an actual result that people who are on the spectrum that take a lysergamine, they become more functioning as if they're becoming cognitively normal from this experience, from this type of conscious organization, from this mind altering substance. And then people who are like, so as we say, normal, right, regular people whom are not on the spectrum, right, when they take psilocybin, right, it's like it dissolves all these boundaries which they already have, and they're really accustomed to this default mode. I just think it'd be like kind of a good thing to see where it brings people cognitively, because it could be the potential that certain doses of psilocybin or even lysergamines, right, to people whom are not on the spectrum, brings them to like the state of blood flow, right, that people are in when they're on the spectrum, the state of overstimulation and conscious perception, should I say, within the mind at least. And have some sort of just observable evidence of that. That's just the whole idea of the MRI, you know, it's just see it. Just to have a sheet of it. My favorite substance would probably have to be like, although lysergimine is something I'm particularly drawn to because it's very healing to me. It's something that's actually brought me a lot farther in my life than probably any substance ever has. Of any substance I've ever encountered. The two substances that have brought me the farthest and like cognitively and altered the course of my life and how I act and how I even literally talk like I'm talking right now, have been lysergimines and psilocybin. And I find different strains of psilocybe mushrooms hit very differently, and like in a good way and a bad way. Like some strains are actually more applicable than others. And it sounds ridiculous, right? But it's like sometimes the more potent the variety, then the less you need. Oh yeah, I saw that. It's okay.
No, it's okay. I didn't hammer it with the thing. What do you call that? With the actual screw. I just like chose like a pin. You know how you put pins on the.
Oh yeah, like a thumbtack or a nail.
Yeah. Now I'm gonna fix it at some point. It's okay.
Oh good. That's all right. I just got like my tents behind me. I'm sure my tents look way worse. At least you're like in a normal like living room environment. I would have been in the living room, but there's people like watching a movie right now. So,
Yeah.
but like I don't know. I feel like the DMT analogs are super important, and psilocybin is that. And psilocybin has all like psilocybe mushrooms have all these different alkaloids in them that we haven't even isolated and classified yet, but we know are there. And I feel like different species have this. These are such unique alkaloids that are super prolific. Like psilocybe azarescens, like I live so far from that, from where they grow. Oh my gosh, it's 710 miles. It's like over a 12-hour drive for me to arrive to where they just live, where they exist. And it's like, I think it's worth it to go take pictures of them, because it has this particularly amazing alkaloid that causes paralysis. And I think it's an alkaloid because when you wash off the fruits, it's like it still gives you paralysis if you eat enough of it. And I think that's got its own message and vibe and effect. And I think the paralysis is like a DMT stillness, as if it's like something that's trying to tell you, like, this is so prolific, like you and anybody else who consumes this fruit, like you need to stop and give this your time. You need to give this place, this moment your time. You need to like be still and be present and see where you can go with this, what you can obtain, what knowledge you can, truly obtain for self, and apply act at the end of this. Come on. And also psilocybe azarescens is the only psilocybe I've consumed, and I've seen closed-eyed visions of being other species. Like I had a vision where I closed my eyes on a couch where I was sitting in my ape form, right? Pardon me, my my higher hominid form, right? And I closed my eyes, and I was an ape, or no, I was no longer an ape, and I was an elk. Pardon me. I was no longer an ape, and I was an elk, and I was in the same dunes of where I was picking this mushroom. And it was almost hypnagogic, but not at all, because I was not the same species. And I was an elk laying on my back. And elk don't really lay on their back; they kind of lay on their side, or they lay on like on their legs. So it's like it was kind of a strange perspective because I was like laying down and I could see my hooves, like my undulated hooves, and I could see all the fur on me that was my coat. And it's like I was looking out at this bay, at this lagoon. It was just like so amazing because I felt as if in that moment, like I ate these mushrooms from this one mycelial mat, right? Because they're fruits from the mycelial mat. And the mycelial mat's like the tree, right? Like you pick an apple from a tree. It's like the fruit from the tree. And the tree is still there and it'll be there for years to come. So it's like this mycelial mat produces these fruits. I picked my fruits from this mat and I ate them at this certain day. And I feel as if at that certain day, at that certain time, right? And it's such a psychedelic statement, but like there was an elk at this patch of mycelium and ate fruits off of this patch and stayed there at that patch and nested there. And I ate my fruits that came from the same mycelial mat on the same day, like coincidentally on like the same day. And like I, and for a moment, could close my eyes and see what this elk is seeing right now, because we both ate fruits from the same organism, from the same mat, or from the same tree, right? And like I felt as if that elk in that moment could see through my eyes what I was seeing in my space as me, as this animal, and it made me feel really connected with other animals in nature a lot deeper in like the weirdest of way. And after this experience, right, after seeing through the eyes of this animal, did I come to the conclusion, dang, I have to go and I have to go hunt an elk. I have to go do that. Like I need to do that. And it sounds so ridiculous, right? Because it's like I just saw through the eyes of this animal. And it's like me having had seen through the eyes of this animal made me feel and understand as if it's all right to see other animals in the animal kingdom eat other animals. It's a part of the system and what's going on in ecosystem. And like me being a predator on this planet, like, and that being an animal of prey, and like something that was like a revered thing amidst my, and so to speak, tribe or family, right? My family line. Like it's like something that like it's like a coming of age or coming of manhood thing, right? You have to have like gotten it out. And it's like it was really funny because after I had this like epiphany, oh man, I need to like, like not just start eating meat again, but I need to like go hunt. I need to go hunt animals, like, and like with my family, and I need to like learn more about like my heritage as like an animal, is the animal I am, because I don't understand what animal I am. And like me with my lack of understanding throughout my life and being autistic, I rejected my family and my heritage in the aspect that like I couldn't communicate with them. And I thought it was so overstimulating when we went hunting, because it's like we had to kill this thing, and bring it back and like, like process it. It was like super overstimulating, and it's like I just thought, well, dang, it's like I'll just like stay in the garden the whole time, and just like and eventually I became a vegetarian, because I learned you could do that, and it's like after 7 years, I actually started to have like like not cognitive but physical backlash, like actual health decline, and I was eating particularly well, probably better than almost any Western vegetarian I know, that's for sure, because I was like living off of like good dark greens, really, really, really good colorful plants, like lots of purple plants. But like never enough plants, never enough of the right things, never enough of the right amino acids to build the proper proteins. So it's like, I just eventually decided, it's like after this one journey, after this super profound trip, and it wasn't just like any old like philosophy as a residence trip. It was like a serious trip. It's like that's the thing about the Kalindi experience, right? Like Kalindi is like 14 to 35 dried grams of cubensis. Well, 5 dried grams of azarescens has 350 milligrams of psilocybin in it, or 35 grams of cubensis. And like there's this thing, as you know, called an MAOI, which increases the absorption of substances. And there's a serotonergic one, which is MAOI-A, and there's a dopaminergic one, which is MAOI-B. Well, Syrian rue has MAOI-A, or harmalis and harmaline. So I took 240 milligrams, and it just takes 140 milligrams for full MAO inhibition, by the way. I took 240 milligrams of MAOI, Syrian rue hydrochloride extract. And then I ate 2 dried grams of turmeric in capsules, and I ate 2 half-gram capsules of decarbed cannabis for an edible to go with that. And I ate those first, and then 20 minutes later, I ate 5 dried grams of psilocybe azarescens. So it was like I ate 35 grams of cubensis, and I also took an MAOI, you know? And I had this really intense and prolific experience, and it lasted for like 8 to 12 hours because I took an MAOI, so it really lasted a little bit longer than the typical mushroom trip. But after that experience, it like totally changed my life and like how I go about my life, and I knew like that couldn't have just been it, like I felt like it as a species, as an organism, as a species within the genus Psilocybin, it had more to teach me. It had more it could reveal to me, even if it's just knowledge within my own mind. It had more deeper things to reveal to me within 12 hours than any acid trip or any other substance that invented or modified, even semi, by man ever could. Because it was a fruit right out of the ground, right ready, an organic organism that's its own strain with its own alkaloids, its own teaching. So I decided, like, next year I'll go pick some, I'll go pick more. And I did, just this year. It was really funny. The picking was kind of slim, but it was also kind of better. Oregon's just recently, Oregon and Washington, like Washington hasn't done it, but Oregon just decriminalized all drugs. So it's like as of like July 1st, it'll be like all drugs will be decriminalized. So they'll be working on like working with addiction, like addiction treatment and how we go about addiction treatment. And I feel like it's a good thing. I, for a long time, felt as if all states should have all drugs legalized. And it doesn't particularly mean I think we should endorse selling all drugs. Because, like, for instance, like right now, we already legally sell meth, right? Because of Adderall and Ritalin. And like those, it's like dextroamphetamine. It's like literally meth. It's like it just converts into meth in people's bodies. So it's like just because it's cleaner doesn't mean anything. It's still going to be just as hard on someone's body because it's meth. It's going to be degrade our health. So it's like, and a lot of dopaminergic substances really degrade the health. So it's like I myself don't do really any dopaminergic substances. I'm not like I like the idea of like mescaline as like a psychedelic substance, but it's also like I'm still very weary of trying it because of how strong it is on the dopaminergic side of things. So it's like I've always just stuck to like a lot of the classics. Like DMT and LSD and psilocybin. But I felt like psilocybin was really where it was at. It has the most profound of teachings, like especially when it's like you build a relation with an organism, like you find a species that you know that you can identify, and you go out and you find it. It's like about the journey to going to it, to finding it, to going within a new place, within a new ecosystem, to discover this thing. So it's like you could like collect its spores, collect its seeds, and like try it, and like potentially bring it home, That's pretty cool. I feel like it literally creates a plant-based relationship.
Everyone has a particular compound that is fit to them, and
Yeah,
I mean, with kids with ADHD, let's say, not all of them enjoy taking Adderall. It's not like, if you have some kind of a hormonal problem and so you get like hormones, you eat hormones every day, so it nourishes you, but it's not the same for them necessarily. Yes, it does, make them function to a level, but methamphetamine is a very complex compound. It's not only alertness and wakefulness, it's also insomnia, it's also feeling quite speedy inside, and maybe euphoria, to a certain extent. And so I feel like every single individual, every single person on this planet has one drug of choice. And when I say choice, it's as if, you enjoy doing it and it doesn't necessarily harm you either. And you're
yeah,
functional on it, to a very higher extent.
yeah,
This is the one perfect psychoactive beautiful compound that works well with my body, and
yeah,
acid to a certain extent. Like for me, psilocybin, because I told you I ate too many chocolates, dark chocolates to potentiate the trip, and I ate the truffles in literally 2 or 5 minutes, something like that, and 10 grams, and cold weather, Amsterdam cold weather, and boom, like all of a sudden you're puking everywhere and everything. But I did observe this one very, like perplexing thing, that I had that psychedelic glow. I don't know, I just knew I had it. It's as if you recognize things when they happen to you at the same time. So when I woke up, I had this very positive, I don't know, just like very slightly euphoric. If you take a good amount of MDMA dose, like a very, very perfect amount, like, calculated with your weight and everything, and in a very proper setting, and next day you wake up, you should be feeling like that. You should be having a psychedelic glow, because MDMA is also psychedelic, kind of psychedelic. Not, I wouldn't say it's like
Yeah,
completely psychedelic, but it does have a psychedelic property. That being
yeah.
part of it, you know.
I'd say it's more of a stimulant factor, and it definitely is psychedelic. And I'd say it's more borderline psychoactive, just because like it's like it converts mostly into MDA, right? You know, like 70% conversion to MDA. So I'd say the MDA is more psychedelic than the MDMA. I think the MDMA creates more of a stimulant factor and increases euphoria, but it's like I've never tried it, so I wouldn't know.
With these substances, it's the dosing that's key. I feel like
Yeah.
dose is the go-to thing that you need to look up whenever you try anything, because a perfect amount of anything can change your life in the most beautiful and the most destructive way possible. You know, it's either one
Oh
of
yeah, straight up.
if someone becomes careless with their dosage, you're in for a heavy ride, you know.
Yeah. I feel like I just really like the classic three because they're the most non-addictive, and that's why I like them. It's because like when you have a prolific psilocybin experience, you don't particularly wake up the next day and think, "Wow, like I can't wait to like take such a large dose. I separate from myself and have to relearn what animal I am." You know, like you don't think you want to do replicate that every day, I should say. When the psilocybin's prolific and it's like you've experienced what it's like to be interspecies and you have to relearn what it is to be a human and like understand your own memories and relearn your own name. It's like you don't wake up the next day and think, oh yeah, do I want to do that again today? You know, you think, dang, it's like I don't know how many months or if I'll even have the courage to do that again within the year. You know, that's kind of how it is. And when it comes to like a really prolific acid experience, it's like the afterglow is typically so perfect. You want to just ride off the afterglow for so long because you feel so good with that cognition and that placid feel, as if it's easier to comprehend problems and as if your perception on patterns is so particularly even and overpowered for like such a long residual period of time. I feel like it's like always one of those things like I like to enjoy that like 2.5 weeks, 3 week period where it's like I feel cognitively improved for such a great period of time. And there's just almost no need. Like I feel as if to have another acid trip after that when you're at that state, right, where you're in that perfect space where it's like every day you wake up, you cognitively feel super neuroplastic as if you could tackle any problem and like perceive patterns really well. I feel like it's like to take another trip and put yourself in a different mindset and physical setting, then it's like you'll change that, you know. You might change that afterglow, and then you'll lose that, you know, and it won't have the same effect, although you'd think because I took this same substance, right, it should have the same sort of effect. But it's like a psychedelic, right? And psychedelics are all about your mindset, your physical setting, your intentions, right? Like those have a huge play, right? And your expectation. Your expectation also has a huge play. I've seen people take some of the same doses of psilocybin mushrooms and have the most entirely different experiences I have never had before in my life. Like I can take a lot of psilocybin mushrooms and not experience what some people can take and experience in low doses. Like I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he took like I'd say about 7 or 8, maybe 11 grams of cubensis, and he was literally telling me because like I went to like visit them, you know, I was like I went to check in on them, see how they're doing, you know, and like uh I get there, you know, we're like hanging out, we're smoking weed and talking, and like he's there and he's talking to me, you know, and he has his ego and all, but and it's like he never separated from his ego, but like he was describing to me the next day what happened, and he was telling me how like he was looking out at the window across the kitchen table, and it was as if the whole wall of the kitchen was gone, and it was just like as if the whole thing became the window. And there was several times when he would look at me, and like I'd be Morpheus and changing, like my head changed, and I turned into a pirate. And one time I lost my teeth, and then it like converted back, and like I was like barely myself, but I was still somewhat me. And it's like he's seeing this off like a little over a heroic dose. And it's like when I take a heroic dose, I get like ego dilution and separation as if I don't know my name. And I'm like I can like barely remember my own identity and like have contact with how I organized my hands and physical space, like how I move, how I walk, how I talk. It's like those are all default mode functions, you know, and I feel as if I separate from them when I take anything more than 4.5, 5 dried grams. And I'd never get any visuals like that. Like my visuals for psilocybin are more like sometimes slightly wavering, sometimes slightly breathing, but the visuals are relatively next to nothing in open-eyed space. And then also it depends on the species, right? When it comes to like azarescence, it's all closed-eyed visuals. When it's like even on 5 dried grams of azarescence with an MAOI, which is azarescence is one of the most potent species in the world, by the way. And just it's just, you know, me personally, my psychology, but like I had very little, if not any, open eye visuals. It was like DMT, and when I opened my eyes, everything was perfect symmetry. Everything was perfectly symmetrical, and there was nothing happening here. I wasn't seeing like with the Kundalini thing, like Kundalini II was warned that people like you could see entities walking through the space you started eating the dose in, because the whole idea of a Kalindi is that when you eat it in cubensis, it's 14 to 35 or 42 dried grams, you know, which is a lot. And it's like several ounces, you know, like if you take a lot of them, it can be several ounces. So it's like by the time you're done eating the bag, you're not in the same physical space. That was the whole idea. But it's like when you eat a more potent variety, you have time, right? It's like you eat 5 dried grams of azarescence, it's equal to 35 grams cubensis. Now you got 2 hours to wait, you know? And it's like when that like and it's just such a totally different experience. Like I felt as if it was like DMT with my eyes open and things just looked perfectly symmetrical. But with my eyes closed, I was in entirely different spaces. I was journeying through memories I had never accessed in like over a decade, you know, like I was being different animals. I was like going into DMT spaces like that were not here, you know, not in my memories. I was having sensations of going out of my body and losing the awareness of my breath, like on DMT, because it was like totally a DMT trip. But with the psilocybin factor of relaxed muscles, the azarescence factor of paralysis, and the psilocybin factor of no ego. When you smoke or eat DMT, regular and NDMT, you have your ego. It's like you, the ego, have signed up for this journey and you can go. But sometimes you can separate from ego on DMT. But when you take psilocybin DMT, right, 4-PO-HO DMT, you almost always, if you take a right dose, you'll separate from ego almost every time. And it's like I've seen so many people that I thought, dang, that dose would have totally separated me from my ego, and they'll eat that dose, and they will not lose ego at one point in the journey, for like the whole 8 hours. They like as if their own default mode is so structurally sound and so well built. It takes a lot, many more milligrams, like tens of milligrams more psilocybin for them than it does for me to like separate from ego. And I also feel like that's the thing. It's kind of like one of those spectrum things, right? Like I feel like for me, when I take psilocybin, I'm particularly sensitive, and I feel like I could take like 3.5 grams sometimes, and I could get to this point where I'm separating from myself. And it's like I'm always able to come back to my name and everything, and it's not too much ego dissolution, but it's like I'm separating from my ego for sure. And it's like an eighth of cubensis, and that you should know, like regular people need typically 5 to 7 grams, or like 2/8 of cubensis to get ego dilution at all. And it's like I think it's just me being particularly sensitive, or it could just be me and how my mind works being someone on the spectrum. And also I feel like that's how it is with lysergamines. Like I could take lysergamines or LSD, and like I could take 400 to 700 to 800 microns. I could take 1700 microns or 1.7 milligrams, and I could be tripping like most people do off 200 to 400 micrograms, you know? Like it's as if it increases how I cognitively function and doesn't actually make me trip like everybody else does when it comes to lysergamines. And then I could handle astronomical doses of lysergamines. And it's not like I have a really high tolerance. It's like I wait the proper time frame in between. It's just like I don't know how I cognitively work and how a substance affects me as an individual. There was these one particular tabs that were 350 microns, and I remember sharing them with someone, and they were telling me that they were visibly seeing like fractals and these geometrical patterns within open, 3D space, like here, like how we see the world. And all I could tell them is that, to me, in my perception, the world just looks like a nice, crisp oil painting, as if I could perceive all patterns very well and at the right pace, and that nothing's moving and nothing's different. It just all looks very well and crisp, and surface reflections are at their best, and I could perceive them very well. Politics and science should never mix. I feel like science is science. Science is facts, and like we can't disagree with the facts.
Yeah.
And if the fact of the matter is it's a flower and it's delightful to smell and inhale, then people are gonna do it. And if people like it so much that they carry the seeds of those flowers across continents and across countries, then that's what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Same thing with fruits.
There's no value. So how can political built-up organizations? Because we built politics. It's a theoretical model in play.
Yeah.
Why would politics be mixed with science so heavily? Because that's what's happening in the US right now with the whole now wearing a mask.
This is so convenient you mentioned that, dude. I have this right here in reach. This is my book by Rupert Sheldrake. I don't know if I have this like clear on there. Science Set Free, 10 Pathways to New Discovery. So what's really cool about Rupert Sheldrake, right, is that he's like a legit scientist, and he's like so caught up about that too, how we put like our opinions, right, and like dogmas before science and before testing it, before like our actual results. And so when he talks about the 10 pathways to new discovery, there's like several points that he explains how there's these 10 primary dogmas in science, and we take them for granted and we take them as eternal truths, right? And like how we don't actually know that these are like 10 factual things, and that these are just 10 great concepts, and that nobody's actually like proven, and that these aren't things that we truly understand, and that us as a scientific community have like gone with such a political agenda that we take these 10 particular pathways for granted, and we just use it as a political agenda. And that's what's so wrong. It's like we've turned science into dogma. That's why I like Rupert Sheldrake, because he can articulate that so beautifully. He could like literally he could like take it and like use religious concepts to articulate like a political scientific perspective on modern times. Which is really what it is, like the whole book.
The other day I was reading this classical psychedelic book, which I'm sure you're aware of here.
Oh, word. What is it? The Psychedelic Experience. Oh, nice. I've never read that.
You have to read it. I feel like as soon as you jump into this, everything's gonna make sense. Like,
nice.
No, like I had a trip, and I had a very profound trip, extremely profound, probably the most intense trip I've had till now. I had a brief 3 to 4 hours of complete ego dissolution, when I was playing on the ground, and it was a very Alex Gray kind of visual geometrical fractals and patterns and tunnels. I almost thought I was doing DMT. I'm not even kidding. Like, it was weird. It was intense, and my whole body at the same time there was this feeling of complete unity amongst.
Did you take LSD?
Yeah.
You could sense as if everything was flowing like perfectly, and every gear was turning properly. Like it's just as if every cell divided perfectly on time, and every breath equated to the perfect amount of energy and power. Yeah, that's a very common experience from a good acid trip. That's for sure.
Definitely the best acid trip so far. And I remember, questioning, because like, who am I? What the hell is this? And like, what am I seeing? Why am I seeing tunnels and shit?
Oh yeah, you see what you just did? Those 3 questions are a part of the 5. You see?
Yeah.
Like, who am I? Like, what am I? Like, why? Like, those are the first big 3. And it's like how and when, right? And it's like it just comes out of everybody. Those are like the organic 5 questions. And like those are the biggest ones. And they really come up during tripping. And I don't know why myself. But I just wanted to point that out. Like even every person I've ever talked to when it comes to psychedelics, the most profound of statements and epiphanies I ever have come from those 5 questions. It comes from the start. Like the start of the question has that one of those words in front of it, whether it's how or what or why, or who.
So when I started reading this book, and it talks about Bardo Thodol, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. It's called the Tibetan Book of Death. From a psychedelic point of view, Timothy Leary wrote it, like rewrote it, I'd say that. And so I started going through it, and it has like all sorts of, it starts by describing the first part of the trip towards the end. So it's like you understand what a trip is, but in a very esoteric sense, because this book is about Buddhist, I would say Buddhist theories of esoteric states of consciousness. And so when I was reading this, and there's a part, I've just like underlined, I've underlined, a great amount of this book, because when I read this book, I understood what my trip was about. Because like when my trip ended, I was just in a state of perfection, but I didn't know what to make out of it. And so when I started reading this book and I entered the area of ego loss, it perfectly describes how you are so immersed in that psychedelic experience that you don't have ego anymore, that you don't have any external defenses anymore. You're a subject. Let's take the object to be the wolf. You're perceiving the object, but it's not just a very simple subject-object relation interplay. It's much more complex, because there's a lot of dimensions to it. Like you have your psychological factors, you have your physical phenomena going on, but what counts the most is the psychical state of consciousness that you're in relation to the object, or that is the world that you're experiencing outside. So it's like almost going so in that there's another out there, so it's like you're going inside only to enter another inner gate. I know it sounds very abstract, but I don't know.
No, it makes sense, man. That sounds very DMT indeed, actually. That sounds very DMT. Huh.
It's quite acidy. So you know how there are things called NBOME and bombs or whatever?
Oh yeah, N-bomb.
Yeah. I mean, for some time I was reflecting maybe it was an N-bomb, but I'm not really sure.
Oh yeah, that's why you want reaction agents to test and make sure it's the right substance. I use reaction agents to make sure my tabs are at least lysergic, or at least lysergamines. That's to say that it could be 1P-LSD or ALD52 or LSZ or LSD. I don't know. It's just a lysergic analog, and there's no way for me to prove what that substance is, because it's not isolated in a raw, crystal thing that could be like looked at and evaluated and like tested. There's not enough of it to test so many times. There's not enough reaction agents to like confirm. You need like 10 or 15 reaction agents to be like so certain, to be like 99.99% certain, like with a couple reaction agents, you could determine if you have lysergamines. It just takes at least Elric and Marquise to be relatively certain that it's lysergamine. And also it's like you gotta really like have a good trusted source, something like you really trust, because it's like, oh man, like a bad batch acid could lead to a lot of like biological health problems. And like they actually have like a rating scale for the quality of purity of LSD, which is really strange. But it's kind of cool. The cleanness is called white fluff, and then the second grade to that is called like orange sunshine, right? Because it's like it's an orange. It's also referred to as amber, because like the crystal or the substance, which just comes out as a tartrate, and tartrate means salt. It'll come out kind of amber, so it's impurity content. And then like below that, right, like it gets worse, right? Like it gets worse. There's this thing called tar, and it's like such a like rough chemical base that's barely LSD, right? It's ergot alkaloids. It's like such in a rough state. It's basically black goo, and it's like active, but it's like not good for someone's health, right? And it's like that's the thing, like that black tar would test on a reaction agent to be like proper, and that black tar could be diluted enough to be laid onto sheets, which is terrible, because it's like it sounds like black tar, like like people say like for other substances, but it's like black, right? It's like this black goo, and it's terrible because it's so much not acid. So much percentage of that weight is not pure alkaloid. And that's the whole idea with white fluff, right? White fluff being the top of the scale is like the purest, like 99+% like pure lysergic acid diethylamide or lysergamide, whichever one's synthesized, you know? It could be ALD52 or 1P-LSD or anything. Or 1B LSD, all those other lysergic analogs, you know, whatever is synthesized. If you synthesize, it should be white fluff, you know, it should be pure, the pure substance, you know. That's the problem when it comes to acquiring substances from strangers, knowing it, like you don't know how well refined it was. So like sometimes you would find like what's pure acid, right? But it doesn't feel all that well. It doesn't digest all that well, and a lot of people puke from it. That very well could be some amber or some tar, like acid. You know, it's just not that pure, not made that well. And it still has all these other chemicals in it that it shouldn't be eaten because they're carcinogenic and they could cause cancer, especially when you eat them. Like, you know, even in low doses.
Psilocybin is, the most. I mean, it is natural, so
Oh yeah. Well,
yeah.
it's like that's the thing. Like lysergamines, you know, they're the other side of the fungal coin. You know, because lysergamines, they're synthesized from ergot, right? And ergot's like a claviceps. It contains several different ergot alkaloids. It's got a lot of alkaloids in it, and claviceps is a sclerotia. So kind of like the psychedelic truffles in Amsterdam. It's a sclerotia, but it's just formed in grass, right? It forms in grass tails. So it's like a sclerotia that forms in the seed of a grass, like when the grass seeds. So it's a fungus, right? That's living inside of a grass, whether it's a grain or just any variety of wild grass that tails with seeds. And it's like it'll live inside the other organism and it'll eat off of it and it'll like steal its nutrients from the root network, you know, and it's like living inside of this other organism like an infection. So it's like a serious fungus, you know, and it is a fungi, you know, it's in the fungal kingdom, but it doesn't produce fruiting bodies, it produces sclerotium. And those sclerotium are what needed, or is what's needed to be collected for people to produce any sort of ergot alkaloids if it's done with organic chemistry, that is. There's also what people use is called full synthesis. So they do entirely synthetic chemistry to produce these chemical constituents in order to make other chemicals. So it's like they don't use chemicals found from plants within nature and isolated that because like that takes a lot more work. So it's like psilocybin like psilocybin is from the Psilocybe genus of fungi, and the Psilocybe genus is awesome because they're fruits, they're fruiting bodies, and it's ground fruit, right? So it's like we as an animal were meant to pick that up, you know, and you can just eat that straight and it's already psychoactive. It's good to go. It's pretty cool. But what with ergot, you can't just eat that, or else you get St. Anthony's fire, you can get gangrene, you know, you can get really sick and like actually die, you know. So it's like no good. It needs refined and processed, and that's fine when it's processed. It's all right. They're separated alkaloids. They're modified for human safety specifically, and for the benefit and of the health of humanity. Let's put it that way. For the benefit of the health of humanity. It's why they're refined and modified. But it is from a fungus, you know. Traditionally, it's from a fungus. It's just the other side of fungus, right? Like as if there's the head and the tail side of a coin. It'd be like psilocybe would be the head, right? Because they produce fruits, and then it's like the tail side would be acid, right? That's the other side of the fungal coin, you know. It's just like we oftentimes don't acknowledge it because it's like semi-synthesized, you know. I just like to point it out because it's like it comes from a fungus. It's just like we don't consume it in its fungal base, you know. You could if you wanted to. I just don't think it would be good. I don't recommend it. Like health is wealth. That's the thing about Psilocybe azarescens, right? Like Psilocybe azarescens is a great fruit. But it's a thing what can grow literally right next to it, coexisting within the same ground, in the same fields, in the same tree line, is called Gallerina marginata, or what's known as the deadly Gallerinus. And it is a little brown mushroom, and it has a hegrophanous two-tone cap, and it has brown spores, and it has a ring on the annulus, and it does not have these beautiful white rhizomorphic roots, and they always have brown spores, and it doesn't bruise blue because it doesn't have psilocybin. But when you're an amateur and you can't identify them, the differences, and you don't take a spore print like you should be, You know, like you could accidentally eat a deadly Gallerinus when you go to pick a wood lover psilocybe. And I just think it's so funny how it's like nature as a thing decided to put one ground fruit that contains deadly alkaloids next to another ground fruit that contains dank alkaloids. So it's like these dank alkaloids are beneficial for your nervous system and eventually make you a smarter entity, right? And these deadly alkaloids, well, obviously you don't have enough time to become a smarter entity when you have 5 to 7 days till your liver and kidneys shut down from the deadly amatoxins. So it's like nature knows, and it's like nature did this on purpose. It put these two things here, it put them there, you know. And now I don't know how much nature did that on purpose or how much that's just coincidence, right? But it seems to me to be particularly profound that almost anywhere you could find a wood-loving psilocybe, you could find Gallerina marginata. So it's like a Psilocybe cyanescens, which is the wavy cap, and it grows off wood chips and stuff, like in the Northwest or in the UK and all sorts of places, and like in Germany and like sometimes in the Netherlands. I don't know. It oftentimes you could find coexisting within the same wood chips Gallerina marginata, and it's just so interesting how it's like you wouldn't think it should be there, and then when it comes to Psilocybe ovoidescus, people can find it in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in like the United States, and people could find it in the Northwest and like a lot of places, right? And like out all the way out east and like Virginia and stuff. Like people could find Psilocybe ovoidescus. And you could also find this deadly Gallerinus, which is so weird. It seems like, in my opinion, there's got to be some form, and it's just a real opinionated statement, and I know, but it's like there's got to be some form of creationism to the degree of which there's some sort of direction with what organisms are doing and their role in this plane of existence. And we don't particularly understand the grand scheme of it, but we do know when it comes to the little pieces of the puzzle that for some reason the dank and the deadly coexist, and they're there. And I think kind of nature has them there for a reason. A smart enough ape, right? If you pick a deadly mushroom, then that ape is no longer around. So then those people who weren't smart enough are no longer around. And that sounds like such a real savage statement, but I think it's got like nature's way of like weeding out the weak or the unintelligible or those who wouldn't make a species survive and thrive as like an organism, And I also feel like psilocybin as a substance specifically does the opposite, right? It makes organisms survive and thrive despite its chemical actions. And what makes me say that is that like psilocybe azurescens, it causes temporary paralysis when you consume enough of it. Like some people can eat it and never get paralysis. Every time I've taken that, I get paralysis. It's kind of like intense. So it's like with the paralysis factor, right? It's like if you are out there in the field where they're found, right? And it's like in the cold season, in fall and winter, they're growing. And it's like you eat those mushrooms in the field and you get paralyzed for 4 to 6 hours, maybe 8 hours, right? A trip.